Welcome to Within WordPress, the podcast about people in WordPress and most certainly about the things that they do inside of WordPress or outside of WordPress or pretty much everywhere you can think of. And then today we have a special guest who is, I would say, pretty much everywhere in WordPress. I think we first met in at CloudFest, I think.
Well, I think you're right. I think that's at least where we first had a conversation. I think we
Yeah.
may perhaps seen each other, but
But welcome, Jonathan.
thank you, Ramkus. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So, my first question to you would be, for those who don't know or haven't seen you at one of the WordCamps or CloudFest, who are you and what do you actually do with WordPress? Because I think I hinted that you do a lot, but what is a lot?
So I started out in WordPress just right around 18 years ago, and I was homeschooled. I had a lot of free time growing up, and found the internet at an early age. Found communities. I quite enjoyed figuring out how things worked on the web and began an interest in web and web development at an early age and came across WordPress in that sort of early foray into building websites, both entrepreneurially and for some folks who'd come to me and say, "Hey, can you do this?" And it wasn't too long into that I came across WordPress. I'd started learning PHP and just I was always looking for shortcuts to just get more stuff built and figure it out. And
Mhm.
WordPress came across my radar. And I had a fantastic early experience where I'd been working to try and get WordPress integrated into an existing site so they could use WordPress to blog.
Yep.
And I was having a hard time figuring it out. It was a little bit above my head with just my knowledge of PHP at the time. I went onto the .org forums, asked for help, and a bunch of folks. It was a the thread's still there. It's a
Yep.
fantastic early example of like people who sometimes developers can be a little bit brusque and just
Yep.
just go back and do this. But like Mullenweg chimed in at one point, who was quite helpful. A number of folks came in and were helping me figure it out, and that blew me away.
Mhm.
And so we got the task figured out and got WordPress successfully integrated. And then at the end, somehow, just the idea came to me that I should write a tutorial about this. I just wanted to. There wasn't any particular reason. Some of the folks I was around at the time were like, "Oh, you should sell that." I was like, "No, I just want to create it, put it out there." So I wrote a
Yeah.
tutorial explaining my initial experience. This is like 18 years ago, right? And uh, then just dropped a link to it at the end of the thread, my thanks, and didn't really think anything of it. I was hooked on WordPress, but didn't see it as something that was going to become something I'd put the rest of my career into.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it
Same.
wasn't too
Same.
long after that. Yeah. So what was your first?
Well, very very similar. So, but
Nice.
but in the Netherlands mostly. I started
It,
on the Dutch forum in the beginning, and um, quickly moved to the more international, but
yeah.
very similar in terms of like, whoa, this is came from Joomla, not so friendly, and then the WordPress, like I got answers, like, okay, this is a tutorial answer, wonderful,
There
very
was something
different
about
vibe.
it that hooked me where
Yeah,
and since then, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, been involved in community in a lot of different ways, I realized what I didn't know then, that there's this sense of ownership and this recognition that when we help each other in this ecosystem. Now, I think there's something unique about WordPress specifically because it's
there
not
is.
just open source, but there's something about this idea that when we help each other, we're also helping ourselves. That I don't know, that hooked me early, and it wasn't too long after that once people began to reach out to me and say, "Hey, can you help us do this for our website? Hey, we'll pay you." And I
Yep.
was 19 trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I was like, "Well, okay. Yeah, I'll do some WordPress projects. That's cool." Uh and it escalated pretty quickly from there.
I love how many similarities there are to my origin story. I needed a website myself. Was working with Mambo and Joomla, didn't like it very much. Figured out, hey, here's WordPress, and this was like this is 19 years ago. Figured out some things, built my site, and I shared it with one friend, like one.
Mhm.
Sent him an email like, "This is my new site. I'm
Check it
kind
out.
of proud of this." And he goes,
Yeah.
"I like that. Can you build me one?" And I go like, sure." And he I think he thought I was hesitating. He's like, "I'll pay you." I'm like, "Definitely, definitely we'll do this." Funny.
Ah, it man, there one of the things that was I just look back and recognize was such a privilege and like, opportunity is that because I was early, and you probably had a similar experience, I had the privilege of people from just all over the world on a regular basis, like, reaching out to me. And, so I went ahead and wrote a few more tutorials after that, and for a brief period of time, I was like when you'd search for WordPress integration, it was my stuff that came up, and because of that, I had this opportunity to work with organizations and individuals and businesses of, like, all types, like, all around the world, and, like, I worked on a project with someone from the United Nations at one point, and where they wanted to bring WordPress
Yep,
and did government stuff, large enterprise stuff, like nonprofit, commercial, just this really wide range. And WordPress was the one thing they all had in common.
yep,
And for me, as someone who was already curious, it was fantastic. Every week there'd be several new people who'd reach out to me. It gave me as an entrepreneur a lot of opportunity to experiment with pricing, with different ways to package and prepare things.
yep.
And it was incredible, and I did that, for quite a few years. I was also involved in, like, starting raising money for a startup in the SaaS space, so I got the privilege of seeing the SaaS world and the WordPress world sort of together at the same time, and yeah, that was my early, time in WordPress.
Yeah, again, a lot of similarities. This is funny. It's, uh it's an interesting world where, the sharing of knowledge was the one thing that was pulling me in. Like, I'm innately curious. Like, for instance, I vehemently disagree with, "Curiosity killed the cat," or
Yeah.
if it did, I'm not a cat. I'm curious about everything, so I'll keep asking, I'll keep digging, I'll keep searching.
Let's
Um
talk about that for a moment. So I believe one of my like core values is this idea that like I want to cultivate curiosity. So I
mhm,
believe
yep,
that most humans, perhaps to varying degrees, like humans are born curious and we're curious about the world.
that's how
It's
we
part of
learn.
how we figure things out.
Yep,
And at some point, for whatever reasons, and there's a number of different things, it's we start to stifle that curiosity and I what I've at least come personally to believe and practice is that it's actually important, especially as we get older, that we cultivate it. That there's something about this tension between maintaining a childlike curiosity, if you will,
yep.
and please, yeah. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I was because I know my folks, particularly my mom, was the one who had to answer all of my
Uh-huh.
why questions. And, instead of like, okay, after the 5th or 6th question in a row, instead of, going like, "Okay, enough for today, just figure it out." She would relentlessly keep on answering the questions, but
Wow.
she would answer it in such a fashion that it also made me curious to think about stuff more,
Ah,
and
not just
that
give you
has
the
never
answer.
stopped. So I have yeah, so I've never stopped asking the why questions. Maybe not constantly to you or to people around me, but I would always have the why
Yeah.
questions, and I kept asking them, and I recognize now, so it's part of my blueprint because my sister doesn't have it, my brother also has it, so it's not
Mm,
necessarily that it's genetic, but it's part of who I am, my blueprint. I am curious, and if you find yourself among curious people, there's a lot of stuff to learn from each other, and that drives me at least, in part also for the podcast. Like, I'm curious what you do. I know a few things that you do,
yeah.
um, and
Podcasting is a great way to explore
oh
curiosity.
yeah, absolutely.
Uh, so
You can ask very personal, very direct questions, and most people are just perfectly fine with because it's under the pretense of it's the podcast. It's actually my curiosity. So
one of the one of the things so I want to touch on this idea of cultivation for just a moment
sure,
because and I'm still early in exploring this. My current way of thinking about it is that I will put myself in new situations. So it was last year actually. Last year is when I took up acting for the first time,
okay,
in sort of a more proper way. I auditioned for community theater. I did a musical, so it was a bunch of firsts, right? First time like doing a proper audition. First time in a proper like it was a Sondheim's Into the Woods and I took 2 minor roles, but were still significant for me, had a solo, like a bunch of new things, very challenging,
Yep.
very difficult, and just a fantastic experience for me for a lot of reasons, and it put me in a bunch of new circumstances, and it started with my curiosity, and I had that moment where, "Okay, I'm curious about this, but am I going to actually, like, foray into it?"
Mhm.
And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do it." Like, and I keep being rewarded internally, at very least, for that.
It will.
And
Yeah.
and so I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna keep doing that." Right now, the thing that I'm kind of scared about is, so to me, it's a sign that I'm gonna go that direction, is doing, like, stand-up comedy.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
because I want to become a comedian, but because I want, like, I'm like, this is a whole new territory of experiences, including scary ones, and there's something that, at least for me, my current thinking is that if I cultivate my curiosity and let myself go and experience those things, there's nothing but gain. Regardless of how uncomfortable it may be, it's going to be a valuable thing. What do you think
I
about that?
agree. Yeah, I agree. I fully agree. Whatever I figured out that was happening in my upbringing, I did the same thing
Mm,
together with my wife to our three kids. All three are also hyper curious, and it's
mm,
interesting to see that if you cherish that instead of just saying like again like after the fifth, seventh, 10th why, I kept explaining, and I
yeah.
wouldn't say so. There's a car driving by. A kid asks, "What is that?" And then I hear parents say, "That's a." Well, in Dutch, you say "toot toot" as a reference to that's a car,
Yeah.
and I would explain. So that's a Peugeot 205 GTI, uh, and give the details. And I think that one of the things that triggered is that there's
Mm,
little bits
I
of
like
extra
that.
information that you sort of categorize whatever the thing is that you asked about.
Mm,
And I did the same thing when I learned WordPress. The same thing. I asked why to pretty much anybody who wanted to listen to me. To the point that I had my brain works in such a fashion that I remember where I last saw a tutorial about. I don't necessarily have to Google it. I just know who wrote it last. And then I figured out I have a problem here. I knew the solution over there. I'm going to find it. And
I like that idea a lot. So I'm a parent as well. I have a 13-year-old son, 10-year-old daughter. And I want the same, but I like that idea of providing additional details that are kinda like seed plants, where if you
yeah,
just give, like, a surface answer, and I'll wrestle with that sometimes where it's like someone's asking me a question, it's like, how I'm willing to go really far with what
yeah,
I'll tell them, but it's like, how far do you go? And I'll think about that more, because it's like, if you just give some more details, but think about them as, like, curiosity prompts
yeah,
that the person can choose to follow or not, but offer it to them. I like
yeah.
that.
I always saw the difference. And no um, no negativity towards my sister, but she does things differently, and she would answer her
Yeah,
kid like, that's a car. And if it
yeah,
was a tractor, she would still say, yeah, sure, that's a car. And I'm like, oh no, there's a difference. I would explain, no, that's a tractor because big wheels behind. You can see different profile on the tires, and
yeah.
looks different. It's not just a moving object which has an engine in it. These details matter at some point. Now, some kids like to know that difference, and some are absolutely fine with whatever answer you give them. But the curious ones, in my particular case, all three kids are like the same type of curious as I am. It's fun to see that if you feed that, they'll get even more curious and they'll get more
Yeah.
specific. Um, my youngest is a great example. She's 16 and she has philosophy as one of her
Oh,
courses in high school.
yeah.
And if there's a thing that if you can get a chance to do, it's philosophy because it forces you to think about
Hmm.
stuff you not necessarily going to touch when you're 16, like maybe at 37, not at 16. But it's
Yeah.
interesting questions that you get. And I like feeding that. I think that's just, I wish more people would be that type of curious.
I
Yeah, I
ran
don't know.
into something interesting the other day where there's a tension there. Like, I love reading. So
Mhm.
the tension for me is that if I had unlimited time, so here's an example. How do you relate to things that you don't agree with? Like, or that don't fit a worldview that you have or an ideology? And for me, what I like to think, and like the ideal in my head is that I would give, quote unquote, equal time
Hmm.
to opposing views because most of the way that I solve problems is to let ideas sit in tension.
Yeah.
I'll do research, I'll think about something, and I'll have this, and then I will fairly consciously cultivate an opposing perspective. But I do this in areas of like my explicit interests. I'll do this in WordPress. I'll do this with strategy. With life in general, like for instance, I will rarely talk politics with someone. Not because I'm not willing to or not open to, but just in general, people tend to take pretty closed-minded like
Yeah.
views.
I agree.
And and I do the same. Like we all as humans, we have these biases. And so for me, what been thinking through lately is how do I more consciously determine when I turn that on versus not? Because life is limited. I have finite time and resources. There is this
Yeah.
degree to which, even though I'm open, I look for shortcuts. How do you think about this idea?
So I think I'm again on the same page. I had an interesting conversation today with James Giroux,
Hmm,
where we kind of touched on this as well, specifically where I said, for the longest time, I've had a quote in one of my online profiles saying, I am the leftness in the right.
okay.
And what's
Yeah,
that to
sure,
say
sure.
is it's from a song. I forgot the name of the song. You can Google it. It'll be the whole song is like these weird comparisons where it doesn't make sense, but it does make sense. And the leftness in there, I'm left-handed, so it makes sense for me to have a little
Yeah,
connection there. But on the political scale, I'm not left, I'm not right, I'm not center. I can see value in certain in socialism, in libertarianism,
yeah,
libertar what is whatever. But you know that there's no I'm not and I'm not center. I'm whatever makes sense
yeah.
in what I see as a whole. Um, it's hard to yeah. There's always this room where there's always a argument that completely denounces what you're profoundly
Pretty much.
uh,
Yeah.
uh, assured of that is the truth. There is no truth, and the sooner you realize that it's all perspective, it just becomes easier.
I disagree on that. However, it's good, like the idea of there being no truth. But let's
Well,
say
there
here's
is truth, but it's your truth. It's not. There's no one truth for that fits all.
I think I would agree with that, and that would at least be worth a long sort of exploration. Which to me, it's like, yeah, how could I possibly know things like that? So here's my question. So you and I have a similar perspective from what I'm
Mm.
gathering. A friend comes to you and says, "Hey, you got to read this book." And the book is pretty clearly positioned as fitting into a particular ideology or worldview.
Yep.
And it's not what I don't really care about is whether or not it aligns with mine or not, but it seems like it's going to have a pretty strong perspective on something. And I wrestle a bit with how do I decide whether to do it? Like, oh, this is the tension I'm trying to get at. It's I'm naturally curious about things. What I'm starting to real wrestle with now as I get older is my finite time.
Hmm.
And like I could enjoy that. I could read something and enjoy something that was like just a direct opposite of my worldview and get something out of it. Yet, how do I navigate the choices? Because there's so much to do. And my instinct is that I do need to be selective and picky about it. But anyway, I'm curious, how do you handle that where it's like you have finite time? Someone gives you a strong recommendation. What do you do with that?
Um, I'll give it some time in that I'll look at what the book is about and how
Okay.
much do I think I'll gain from it. I mean, I know I can gain from a completely opposite view of what I see as a truth at that moment in time. I also know there's like for instance, find the perfect diet. So
Mm.
there's people that say
Yeah.
uh, eat eat plant-based.
Yeah.
There's people that even go one further and say no, fully vegan, like
Yep.
nothing can touch or come from an animal. So it becomes a lifestyle. There's people who do the carnivore diet. They only eat meat, like literally only
Yeah.
um,
No vegetables.
steak.
All secondhand.
Yeah, all steak and lamb, and that's it. Both have the effect that existing problems, any weird types of diseases and bowel movements, and stuff that just doesn't is not your normal default state, can dissipate, just be gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So which one is the right one? Which one is the truth? So
Right.
I'll have my curiosity about the carnivore diet. as I've had my curiosity about plant-based, I've eaten plant-based for 9 years. I'm a little over a year back to eating meat. That's a conscious decision. And that's essentially that. So somebody came with new evidence, new angle. I was like, that's interesting. I'll research it. And I found more truth in that than I did one as opposed to what I was doing at the time. So it's a balance of finding what information resonates with me because I'm picky. I don't dive into everything anymore. Again, I'm acutely aware that the time is finite. I'll find something that resonates with me in one way or another.
So I had a similar experience, and I'll connect this to something relevant in WordPress. So first, I was raised vegetarian,
Hmm.
so I started eating meat. Like I've tasted meat on a few occasions over the years, but I started eating meat for the first time last year. And and part of the reason why I did it, because I'm pretty all in on the overall benefits of a plant-based diet, like, but I also don't, but part of the reason why I did it is it began to bother me that I still talked about, like, not eating meat. Like, I was like, it's like there's something about it that I was holding it like a bit of a some special designator or like a
Yeah, yeah,
prize,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Oh, I've
Became a
never
part
done
of your
this."
role.
And I was like, I don't think that really serves. So it felt like an area where I was unnecessarily blocked. So yeah, I'm like, okay, it felt a little bit counterintuitive. I'm like, I'm gonna start eating meat. I'm going to try some things. I'm gonna experience some more things here. Because anything I think that's worth a good idea holds up to scrutiny. And to
Mhm.
me, it wasn't enough to just say, oh, I was raised this way and just
Yep,
never did it. Right. Where
yep,
now I'm like, um, I feel in a better position for at least for myself to take a more balanced perspective where I didn't like the, I guess what I describe as like the pride association with having never done something.
yeah.
And when it was like, I mean, there's plenty of things I'll be happy to have never done.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But this, that wasn't really a good one, especially within like the social context. And anyway, yeah, so yeah, I'm curious to see where that goes. With WordPress, so I have all this experience as a freelancer, basically, right? Like I got like to a micro agency level.
yep,
Then I kind of felt a little tapped out. Like I was managing like 20 plus projects and I was even though like there was still plenty of like hardness, like lots of things to like figure it out. I was like, it was a lot of the same, wasn't as much of a challenge anymore. Timeline's fuzzy. I feel like that was about 8 years ago,
yep,
but it's I'm not exactly sure. I started to do a bit more of like enterprise work, and that was interesting to me. And I ended up pretty quickly making my way into an agency called XWP. I was the first person from the outside in, and they'd split off from like another company of theirs. And I got involved in sales and doing some like early engineering stuff, and that was a fantastic experience because suddenly we're working on some of the biggest projects in the world, and that was a whole new set of things to learn.
yep,
And it was in that experience that I began to first think about WordPress as an ecosystem and just became more and more curious. I came across this idea that Matt Mullenweg had put out there of thinking about WordPress as an operating system. And at first I was like, what are you on about? Like, what's the deal with that?
yep,
And but the more I played with it, the more I sat with it, I was like, okay, there's something here. And I began to just test it through the lens of the enterprise work that we were doing, through the small business work I was still connected with, and just my broader experience. And a- as the years went by, it just began to like stick with me more and more. And I began to shift my thinking to say, okay, if this is the case, then WordPress, it became a lens through which I looked at the ecosystem where it was
yep,
like, okay, then what do I take from that idea and draw from other ecosystems? What does Apple do? How do they think about the operating system lens and the App Store? What about Android? What about Linux? What about Windows? And why do I feel like this sticks and applies? And just began to poke at that. And at least for me, what came out of that was this growing sense of personal mission where I was like, I really care about this space. I care about WordPress. I care about what it represents above and beyond like just the personal interest and curiosities. It's had a real impact on the people that I've met, on the life that I've been able to create. And I
Yep.
began to see more and more its role in the open web broadly. I got to work with Google pretty early on, and that sort of set my sights to just thinking broader about open web context, some of the benefits and challenges of working with a large organization.
Yep.
And in that process, I just had this growing sense of, okay, WordPress matters. I began to see it as an indicator of the health of how, like, the open web. If WordPress is doing well, then I think that's a good indicator for how the web as a whole is doing. And the way that I like to think about it's like I'm a fan of proprietary platforms and innovation. I just don't want to see that dominate the web. I want
Yep.
open source to continue to thrive. And so I started to look at saying, okay, what can I do? Where is the opportunity for impact in this ecosystem? And for a couple of years, I thought it was the hosting companies. I had a lot of context early on. Worked with a bunch of hosts through the enterprise experience. Just had
Yep.
just a lot of perspective on that, which was pretty unique and valuable for me to have started there. And I organized this little event called Host Camp as part of co-organized it as part of WordCamp Europe in Berlin. This was some years back. And the idea was to have this focus on advancing the state of WordPress infrastructure. And I began to pull together some of these ideas. And this is where the curiosity thing comes back because I was pretty set for a while that hosts were the thing. Like if you, I'm like, this is it. This is how you grow the ecosystem. All we have to do is get the host to work together. And as I sat with it and as I did that work, something began to sort of poke at me, as it often does when you're curious, where it's like, okay, something's not quite right here. There's something like I'm talking to hosts, they're saying yes, they want to work together, they want to do this, but like, why does this feel harder than it should? And I
Hmm.
began to think about the concept of incentives and aligning incentives and misaligned incentives. And the
Yep.
more I got into that, I was like, something's not right here. If one host does a bunch of really valuable contribution to the project, everyone benefits, which is great. But there's almost this like reverse incentive because the people who are competing with them directly benefit from what they do.
Yep.
And so well, there are fantastic people in hosting. And to be clear, like it plays a really important role. But for me, it's like, it's not quite enough. Like there's something here where we're working uphill. And so that set me on this path to, well, what is it then? Like where is the opportunity to have the most impact and leverage, if you will, on growing the ecosystem?
Yep.
And for me, that's where I settled on product companies as the key piece. Basically, if you take the operating system metaphor, they're the apps, right?
Yep.
What
Yep.
good is Apple or Windows without the third parties that build for them? And that put me on this path saying, okay, I think that products are the key to growing the WordPress ecosystem, to mitigating, as I describe it, some of the trade offs of decentralization. One of the a good example is like with decentralization is fantastic. There are thousands of hosting companies. WordPress would be very hard to kill. One of the trade offs is that you have just crazy amounts of choices. It's overwhelming for end users. Things don't really work well together. Compatibility is a problem, and as I began to talk with products and just draw from my product background experience, and I also, in the middle of all this, I went to work at Automatic for a bit. So I was at WooCommerce, which was a great experience for me to just broaden my perspective and have a lot of like context for how Automatic thinks about things. And there's
Yep.
benefit trade offs of that too. And what I ended up settling in on was this idea that, okay, I want to help product companies. I see three problems that keep showing up, at least for WordPress native product companies. I care about the SaaS as well, but for this conversation and context, I want to focus on just like the WordPress native ones, those who kind of
Yep.
grew up in WordPress. They struggle with monetization, business models, pricing. There's a whole set of things that I
Yep.
would oversimplify as being characterized by having been like engineer and or designer perhaps led, but not a lot of business experience. And we did a lot of like copying each other early on where someone priced it this way. So I guess I'll do the same. So
Yep.
there's some challenges with monetization. There's a large problem set challenge with compatibility where even though authors are happy to like work with each other, there's no sort of share standards. There's no real incentives to like facilitate compatibility between products.
Yep.
So when I talk to hosts, like that's the number one problem that sort of shows up for them. but those dwarf in comparison to the heart of the problem, which to me is what I call like the distribution problem, where you can have a product that has a great product market fit. There are, according to Web Pros, like 92 million live WordPress sites today. And if you with even if, no matter how fantastic your product is, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to get that product in front of anything close to your proper addressable market in this space because
Yeah.
they're spread out over thousands of different hosting companies. Sure, there are big players. We can't ignore that. But the reality is just that it's not trivial how to get in front of any of those install bases. Being listed in WordPress.org is no guarantee that you'll go anywhere.
No.
And so then that became the thing that was most compelling to me. It's like, okay, what can we do to solve those problems and to help these products get distribution? And if we can solve that, I think that is what I see, at least today, as the strongest leverage point for growing the ecosystem in a positive, healthy direction.
Is that a marketplace? Does that translate to a
Long
marketplace,
term,
or are
yes.
you okay?
Long term, what I want to see is an app store, if you will, that is shared across 80% of all WordPress installs. And it has one particular key characteristic that I think is not trivial to pull off. If I am with host A and purchase some premium WordPress products and move to host B, those should go with me.
Mhm.
And where we're on current trajectory is hosts are more likely to try and incentivize currently to try and have all of that within them. This is why
Yep.
I don't think, for instance, it's a good idea that hosts buy WordPress products. In general, it's not good for the product. It can be good for the host, but it's not good for the product long term.
That's an interesting point of view.
Yeah. It can be good for the founder as well, who wants an exit, who's done. But in general, the moment that you sell a product to a host, what other host in their right mind is going to want to recommend that same
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
product?
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. You need some sort of altruistic mindset already activated at a host
Which some do.
B and C. Yeah, and some do, but I can see that being an issue.
There's an
No.
incentives problem at least. Like
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
agree to oh, we recommend this product, but like you said, I'm all for altruism and a beneficiary of it and believe in it. I don't think it's a good economic foundation for an ecosystem,
No.
and it's just not how humans work.
To a degree, but there's a limit. Um, Not easily
It,
defined, but there's most certainly a limit from a small business, a single person, a plugin developer, a hosting company. There's just various
yeah.
degrees of what is acceptable.
Well, and especially when you can align incentives. That's what sort of set me on this path where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's one thing if we just have to accept the status quo and this is what it is. But I'm like, no, I think this is actually solvable. We actually can align incentives because the products have problems and the hosts have problems. If we can figure out a way to thread the needle between them, they can help each other without having to buy and there's ways that this can be done. It just requires coordination and cooperation and collaboration.
Yeah.
And that's a people problem. So I was like, okay, I think we can work on that.
I like that. There's a lot of questions I have now, but the first one that pops up as a blocker is at some point you're going to have to you're going to want to have a deep integration with WordPress itself. So
Sure.
that
Yep.
means in one way, um, the only path of distribution right now is the plugin store.
Yeah. .org. Yeah.
Yeah, .org. Yeah. Yeah, I say store, but it's not a store. The plugin repository.
Yep.
How would you solve that one?
So there's a couple
'Cause-
ways. So it's important to think about the phases. So again, the heart of all my work so far is thinking about incentives and figuring out where those lie. And sometimes you have to take multiple steps to get somewhere. So
Yep.
for instance, if we're solving this problem today, if you take a product and that maybe they're in .org, maybe they're not, and you work out a distribution deal with a hosting provider, there's nothing that says you have to use the same physical code, right? Like I'm all for GPL. and just the open source mindset and way of doing things. There are rules though for .org that don't that aren't about just the GPL. It's just the way that .org does things. For instance, how you
Yeah.
relate to telemetry
Yeah.
and just what you do within the product itself that don't have to apply. So you can take a product and go do a deal with a host that distributes that product across their base, and you've basically circumvented .org entirely. Now, this is a curious tension because I'm all in on the value of .org and the work that's being done there, and I want these things to sort of come together, but it's like there's not an inherent dependency. We can do this work independently. You can take a product and have it be distributed directly through a host without and also not pull the resources from .org in doing so.
Yeah.
So that's one example of how I think about this where
So
if for
you're kind of bypassing them.
yes, but as a means to an end, where it's more of like, let's not put the burden on .org, let's innovate outside of it, yet do
Yeah.
so in an open source way. Like I don't I have zero interest in a closed ecosystem, like in some sort of smaller thing. It's like we go for ubiquity or we don't even bother. So for me, ubiquity is like eventually 80% of all WordPress installs share the same infrastructure. It's never going to be 100%. I don't want that.
Yep.
But having a majority means that you have to do this in a way, and this is where I think the hosts come in, where it's like, if we could solve this problem and imagine a situation where you develop the app store, it sits inside of WordPress. It's booted up as like a must use plugin, whatever, however that works.
Yep.
But you distribute it through the hosts and then work out all the stuff, get it functioning, have it be doing the things it needs to do. And then my ideal at some future state is where like you'd bring what .org is doing and cares about together with whatever is developed here, however it's done. And you figure out a way first to make .org be an explicit beneficiary of it, which is
Mhm.
important. Like you don't have any adversarial role. You benefit the project explicitly from the outset. And then as time goes on, you find those ways to bring it to core.
Interesting. So the way to disperse the product is essentially make sure that every single host gets on board.
Um, yes. There's a few ways that you go about that. I've had years to think about this, but that's the short of it. You're never gonna get every single host.
No,
Um,
no, but
and
that is the goal.
and you also give end users, this will be a small percentage, but some people will be self-hosted on their own host. They say, "I want this app store," if you will,
Yeah.
and they'll be able to install it themselves. And this is how some hosts will say, "Hey, our more of our customers are using this. Oh, wow, there's a great program that it offers. We can actually be sharing that revenue. We should sign up for that." So
Yep.
there's a number of ways
Yeah.
that that would work.
Yeah.
Here's a piece that actually that gets me like I this is important to me. I'll acknowledge I haven't figured out how it works yet, but I think the intention matters. To me, in the ideal future state, this app store charges 15% to products. And of that 15, 5%, so I guess 33% of the 15 goes directly into like a Five for the Future program
Yeah.
where that money goes into core, and there's a lot to be said about how that works. There's a lot of trickiness to be worked out. Been thinking about it for years. I have more questions than answers, but the idea to me is it's an example in its simplistic form of how you build in the incentive for Five for the Future without having to rely on altruism at all.
Yeah.
So my ideal would be where there's thousands of products that are, whether they care about it or not, are contributing to WordPress and providing the resources to make the project better. And in my ideal, this is where like the guild concept comes in. If you're in the App Store, 5% of what you make is going into the project anyway. And if you care about that, you can come and get involved in a deeper level and begin to direct where your money goes into specific initiatives. But
Yep.
you give choice along the way. But the heart of it right there is I don't want to go to a company and say, "Hey, put 5% of your money into this." When they're like, "Well, we'll do it, but why is no one else doing it?" Like there's this curious thing where it's
Yep.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
"No, don't worry about that. We're going to provide you with value, and if you don't care, we're gonna do it anyway. If you do care, you can get more involved and direct where what you're contributing goes to." But it to me, it's an example that I get really excited about how you solve the incentives problem without having to rely on altruism.
Yeah. I like it. One of the things I'm curious about, because the project is called Project Guildenberg, right?
Yep.
The word guild is in there.
Yep.
I think I know what it means, but just to be sure, what does the name mean in the context of what you just explained?
So there's a couple of things. Guildenberg at its heart is about solving problems for product companies, and the guild like concept being in the name. So my co-founder Anna Maria came up with the name. I'm quite happy with it. Combines like the idea of the guild with Gutenberg and this like
Yeah.
it's a good fun. But the heart of the idea is to facilitate cooperation, coordination, collaboration between products
Yeah.
and the other stakeholders affected. So hosts join as distribution partners, products join, and there's a lot of things that I want to see it do, a lot of directions where we want to go with it. But at its heart, it's just because it's an organization with aligned incentives to facilitate solving problems for products. And I think
Mhm.
the idea of a guild at least better than anything else that's come to mind, and we're rolling with it. It just evokes this idea of we're working together
Yeah.
on this, and we have aligned interests, even if we might be competing in areas. Like you can have multiple products that do similar things, but we have an overall aligned interest in growing our ecosystem.
Yeah. That is a guild. That is a guild, because that is competitors working together on quality,
Yep.
on the products, on the ways of working, on the yeah. There's many different things that promote a guild. So you've been working with this idea for quite a few years, as you've mentioned.
Yep.
Who, that I'm assuming you had conversations with this in mind with hosting companies, with product companies, and whatever's in between.
Yeah.
How has that been received so far?
So really well. I'm pausing for a moment, reflecting on how hard it's been, how much work
Yeah,
it's been
yeah.
to get to
It's
this
going great
point.
now, but don't ask me about the past 3 years.
So I've been, I've had really helpful feedback at every step along the way, which just speaks again to just the nature of our community.
Yeah,
I've had hosts who just given me the privilege of sort of unfettered access to their thinking, where they've given me really candid feedback on how they think and where, what matters to them. And I've had the same with products. And it's ultimately, I've had just this privileged position of being able to synthesize all of that. And it's still something I'm like iterating on and thinking through and trying to get to the heart of. But after years of thinking and playing with it loosely, and then a year and a half now of like full time focus on it, I feel like I've finally so I've had valid like, I'm gonna put it this way. In some odd sort of way, a lot of my time over the past couple of years was trying to prove not, like push against this idea. Um, where like part of how I will approach problem solving for something important to me is like, okay, hop hypothesis, let's try to prove it wrong. So
yeah.
I'm like, if I talk to a bunch of hosts and they all say it's a bad idea, well then okay, then
And
you know
obviously, it's a bad idea.
if I talk to a bunch of products and they all say it's a bad idea, and so what's happened is that doesn't matter how hard I've pushed or things I've tried, and I've definitely gotten individual things of oh this isn't good, this is something that's off. But overall, it's been a consistent, like overwhelming emphasis on like, yeah, we agree this is a problem set that would be valuable if it's solved. Please let us know if you do something about it or if someone's going to do something. And so that became clear early on. Then the problem was like, okay, how does one actually do this? I know that it's not going to be what Jonathan Wold does. This is like this is a big effort. How do you pull something like this off? I've had startup experience. I've been around a lot of different things. So the pieces were there, but at least for me, it just took a lot of thrashing and like almost this like how serious am I about this? How much does this really matter?
Mhm.
And so I can talk now about how it's going, but like it's been a difficult couple of years where it's tested a lot of my how serious I am I about this. And I keep going towards like, okay, I need to align incentives. It needs to be its purest possible form. I need to be able to explain it clearly. And it takes time to do that. It just takes time. I would like, I'm not sure, Remkus, if I knew how much work it would be if I would have, like, set out to do it. I
Yeah.
might have been just like, "Hey, here's all the ideas, guys. Here's all my blog
Someone
posts.
figure it out.
Y'all have fun."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just I couldn't leave it, and it's just kept coming back, and now I'm like, "All right, I think this is gonna be the next at least 5 years of what I do." So, I'm much clearer now than I was before.
That's good because it's a good idea to the point that it's actually a great idea.
Man.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
current
Do
state.
you need a moment there?
What I'm focused on now, so what I set out to do with my co-founders was like, okay, let's create an accelerator. Let's invest in products and just kind of focus on like getting new products that we want to see to market. I love that idea. That's an important piece of the puzzle. We're still working on that. What I've shifted focus on lately is to say, okay, let's take products that already have product market fit. We can still continue to work with folks who are trying to figure it out, but there's a lot of products that have stuff mostly figured out that just need help with distribution.
Yep.
Let's focus on that. So, what we do these days is we take products that have good product market fit. There's if they're a WordPress native product, there's usually some challenges still, some things that need to be sorted through. That's all good. If they're a SaaS, they tend to have the monetization and business model figured out, but they'll struggle with how to position themselves, how to like go into the community.
Yep.
Those are all both quite solvable, and they all need the same thing, which is distribution. So what we do, we onboard them, and then we work together on a rev share basis. So typically 25% down to that goal of 15% based on the deals that we help them close.
Yeah.
So it ends up being a really simple narrative. I go to a host and say, "Hey, we're going to bring you products that reduce your costs and increase lifetime value. You get a piece of any of this. And you tell us what you're looking for. We'll go find the products that you need. We'll help broker that, streamline it, make it easy so that you can just turn them on, try them out."
Yep.
And that's what we've been doing in different ways for the past couple of years. Now we're streamlining it and turning it into a program, building a team around doing that. And yeah, that's the heart of what I see as the key economic engine for everything else I want to see Guildenberg do. If we do nothing else but just help products get distribution and help hosts like reduce
Consider
costs
success.
and increase lifetime value, we're good. Like I want to
Yeah.
build an app store. I think the work that I'm describing now is the key activity to get there, and I'll keep taking us in that direction. But even if it doesn't look like what I want it to, it's like this is valuable work. This is a good loop that we can continue to do. So that
Yep.
will be the basis of what Guildenberg Inc., the commercial side of the business, does going forward.
Makes sense. So are you focusing on products as in plugins slash themes, or are you focusing on services or as
Products,
well as
products. So
products?
services, I care about the service ecosystem. It's not a yeah. Right now, the
Can you give an
focus is
example of what
yeah.
wouldn't work currently? Um,
Something that so what works is scale. Like where it's like if you and there's a curious line there. Like I can work with some productized services to some degree, but
yeah,
I think it's really on the side of that if it's more niche, then you also have to work with niche hosts that focus on like
sure.
specific markets. That's totally a thing. I like that work. In general, though, it's focusing on products that like, all right, it has a million install base right now. How do we grow it to 10 million
Yeah,
through distribution deals and kind of build around that? There's three types of products that I think about in the WordPress space. They're either feature products that bring a specific piece of functionality to WordPress. They're integrations with SaaS,
yeah,
where it's like connecting with WordPress with some other system, or they're an ecosystem plugin. WooCommerce is a great example of that. Forum builders and forums and builders tend to be good examples of this as well,
yeah.
where there's an entire ecosystem of its own. And what we're trying to do is grow the install base for that ecosystem.
Can you give me an example of the first two as well?
The ones that we work with?
Yeah,
Yeah, we started. Well, so my work is split into what I did before Guildenberg, which I can talk about, and also what's now like officially in Guildenberg. So
sure.
the one of the first products that we started working with is called Short Pixel. It's
Yeah,
a image optimization product. The goal there with Short Pixel is to be able to Like they've got a good product. They've been around for a long time. Okay, how do we help more people become aware of it? What does it look like to bring short pixel functionality into other products in the
Yep.
performance space, and to do deals with hosts that get short pixel across their install base? Another example that I've been working with here recently is Ninja Forms. They've been around for a long time. They
Yep.
have a great product. I think that they're still early in what their install base could be. So they're a good example of an ecosystem plugin where I've been working with Quay and the team to say, okay, hey, you guys have a loyal customer base, a lot of like great stuff going for you. How do we make some improvements to what's there in terms of the business model and positioning? And
Yep.
then get yourself ready for partnerships so that we can grow the install base. They've been doing great work. It's been a lot of fun working with them. And those are two good examples on different sides. And
Yeah.
now I'm talking with a bunch more.
Yeah. I mean, I get that there's not possibly there's quite a few that you can't disclose, but it sort of helps understanding if you have examples, like
Yeah.
what does that look like? So is
I'll
there
have a
stuff
lot more to share in the future as well.
I'm betting on it. Is there
Actually,
certain, yeah,
what I just wanted to touch on with that is a big thing that's motivating for me, especially with who we work with early on. I want to, it's really important to me that we open source the work that we're doing. I was thinking about this today of like, because like a lot of what I do with these products is actually like stuff I've already written about. So it's that's important, but I want to make it even more accessible where it's like we're developing playbooks. How do you do partnerships? How do you improve the onboarding in your product? How do you think about pricing? How do you think
yeah,
about I was talking to Matt Cromwell the other day about the work he's done in customer experience. And
yep,
I was like, man, this would be awesome to like take this and turn this into a playbook for the guild where people can have the benefit of what Matt and his team worked out. And that's so it's really important to me as with those who we work with early on that they're and I've loved this. Like Quay and his team have been fantastic. The short pixel guys as well of just being open and making changes to things. And whether someone works with Guildenberg or not, I want them to benefit because again, the goal is to grow the ecosystem.
yep.
And so it's like as we work these things out, how do we just make it more available? So to me, it's really important that our incentives are aligned to do so openly and so that's why I have confidence that we'll be able to see a lot more of this stuff because it's like, hey, this is what we did. This is the playbook that we created as a result.
It's very much aligned with the open source
Yeah.
philosophy,
Yep.
sharing and um,
That's how you make it
together
better.
putting in an effort to make the world better, whatever we define as the world. Um, are there um, types of products that are hard to work with?
Um, so I've been thinking more about enterprise lately. I care about the space quite a bit. I that was my
What do you define as enterprise? Because that's a very fluid
yeah,
concept for most.
sure, fair. There I can take it from a couple different ways, but they're gonna spend at least $1,000 a month
Yeah,
on something, right?
yeah.
Like there's that's obviously like bottom end, but like
You
they're
need
at least
you need to get on a vendor list. There's things like vendor lists.
yes, that's a whole thing. So I care about that space. I think it's an important part of WordPress's growth. I'm planning to work with a couple of products that I'd say are more enterprise skewed, but I'm pretty selective about it just because like ultimately I care. I think it's more important to focus on like the 80% as a whole, like the WordPress ecosystem as a whole. So
Yep.
if we get the balance right, so like if I have 10 products to work with today, I really would like no more than 2 of those to be enterprise focused, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There are a lot of enterprise products that are interesting that could be worked with, but I'm like, I need to keep that ratio, especially now. And then I think those that rely too much on like I guess what I was alluding to, like the productized service where it's not really scalable. I care about them. They're an important part of the ecosystem, but it would be something that I would love to see us get to later. Whereas right now, I want to focus more on products that have scale, that all they're really missing is the
They're
distribution piece.
the scale is built in already. It's already there. It's just not activated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I'm also asking that question for whoever is listening or watching. Like,
Yeah.
um, how does that work for my product? Like, how can someone determine whether scale is already part of their product? Are there any metrics that you would look at?
Part of it, I mean, part of it's just the simple idea of does your product work on its own or does it require human like assistance, right? As productized
Yep.
services require human, like that, so they're inherently less scalable. Um, I also say this. This is important to me as someone who's been in this space a long time. I really enjoy all of this. It's important to me. This is what motivates a lot of my writing and creating the playbooks, like going to word camps. It's really important to me to just be available and to be helpful as I've been helped. So if someone's
Yep.
like it to me, it's not about whether you work with Guildenberg or not, whether I make money on it or not, in that sense of things. It's like how do we grow the ecosystem? So what I want is for people who are trying to figure things out to feel free to like ask questions. And if I like, if there's an opportunity to work together, fantastic. If there's not, like I was talking to someone the other day and it's like, I think we're aligned, but let's just be really candid about whether the timing's right or not, because this, like, we don't have to do anything. And anyway, I want to encourage anyone. This is what I've found to be the case in this space. And I want to continue to perpetuate that the more accessible we can be to each other,
Yep.
the more that we benefit from it. And sometimes people are like, "Oh, I no, they wouldn't wanna talk to me." Like, no, it's not true. You don't know until you've asked, and I love talking with
Yeah.
founders who are trying to
Yeah.
figure this stuff out, and maybe it'll inspire a new blog post, if nothing else.
Where would they find that blog post?
So, right now, my writing's mixed between jonathanwold.com and guildenberg.com. I'll probably be writing most of my WordPress focused stuff on guildenberg.com in the future.
Yep.
Most of my library of writing on the topic at the moment is on jonathan.com. So between those two,
Yeah.
it's a good spot.
Yeah. You want the subscribers on both. I get it. I get it.
I suspect jonathanwold.com over time is going to become more about my my curiosity explorations. I wrote about theater on my last post,
Yeah.
and uh, and I'll move WordPress more the other, except for perhaps some philosophic posts about WordPress as I get old.
Well, geez, define old because I'll turn 50 next month. So
Yeah, so it's not a negative for me. I'm quite proud of the grays that are starting to come out. Like,
yeah,
it just means that we've had more experience.
it, it does. It also means I got gray real early. So
That's
um,
fantastic.
no, I've embraced it. So I have the family hairdo already. So I knew what was coming.
I love it.
Um, my son is 25, and he'd go like so. Has like the I don't know what's that called in English, but like the hair receding at
Ah,
the
yeah, the
sides a
receding
little bit.
hairline. Yeah, they'll
Yeah,
call them
he
like
goes like,
widow's peaks or something. Sometimes
oh yeah, okay.
weird.
So he goes, should I just switch to the family hairdo, or do I still have a few years? And I'm like, you have a few years. Just go. Just
You got to
that's
figure it.
fine.
Enjoy it while you got it.
Exactly. But
My grandfather kept long hair into the end of life, so I'm probably good. But you never know. You never know.
so I think they say it comes from the mother's side.
It was on my mother's side. Yeah.
So if that's the case, you are good. In my case, I should have some hair left if I grow it. If I look at my
Yeah,
dad, I should have
but
absolutely nothing.
benefits and trade-offs, right? Like, I end up in this it takes like, the longer mine gets, the more work it is to also take
Oh
care
yeah.
of it,
So
so there's,
I shave twice a week. Very simple, very straightforward. Never have
beautiful.
to think about how to do my hair. So what I find interesting is that your curiosity combined with your interest in what the open source community is about led you on very well. I'm going to call it a big path, but I mean
Yeah,
that in the sense of it's a large and lofty goal.
yeah,
Um,
it is.
I've seen other projects inside of WordPress strand. I'm thinking of the WP governance
Mhm.
thing
I'm familiar, yeah.
that was attempted to launch and get traction on a few years back. Obviously, that traction also depended on the project management slash lead to
Yeah.
be fully onboarded. How important is that for you? Uh, I
Well,
don't mean necessarily Matt Mullenweg, but I mean
sure.
the foundation, the core group of contributors, whether that's core or just generally very active on
I like this
anything.org.
question a lot. So I think I'm a big fan of Josepha's. I think she's quite
Yep, I am
underrated.
too.
for those who know her, and the work that she does to lead the project, like at the director level, it's incredible. I hope that we as a community continue to like work to just get better at supporting the work that she's doing. It can be pretty
Yeah.
thankless at times. So
She
I
does a lot.
and a lot that goes unseen, and there's
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of
Most, I
challenges.
would say.
Yeah, the most, yes.
Yeah.
And so so the project is really important, and the .org structure is really important, and there so I guess the way that I think about it is that we're tackling a different problem set. I would love to see .org over time become more, and I love the work that Angela's been doing on exploring like new WordCamp formats, et cetera, like ways that we can better serve the ecosystem. So I'd love
Mhm.
to see the project over time become more like embracing of commercial interests and just the different roles and dynamics. But like I'm okay if it doesn't. And here's why. Here's I guess the way that I think about it is like we can solve this set of problems for product founders in a way that just explicitly supports the project, this idea of the 5 for the future,
Yep.
whether like without like any fanfare or hoopla. It's just a decision, right? Where it's like I'm building this model in a way where there are going to be funds in a box to allocate, and we'll allocate those funds. Like it's a pretty simple loop where it's like you go to people on the project, team leads, um, and it's like, "Hey, what do you guys need? Like, what are the needs right now? What are things that need to be done?" And then you just do those things.
Yeah.
And what I love to see over time is interest to align, but it's okay if they don't. I don't think you force anything. I think there's a natural, like, let's go build this app store, work with the host, solve problems, do so in a way where we are explicitly connecting ourselves to core through contribution, through work
Yep.
on the things that need to get done. If we can get those worlds to connect in the future, great, but that's not a problem for today. And for me, at least personally, and my intentions in building this organization is to support the work of Core, but doing so in a way of like, even if it's not all that noticed, it's like on the economic sense where it's like, I'd love to see us sponsor a bunch of contributors who can stay independent, who
Yeah.
can work on things that need to get worked on. The
I was
bias
going to
is
ask
there.
that.
We're going to represent the interests of the products. So there will be an inherent bias, but my belief is that if we work on things that are good for the products, like better shared standards, maybe more emphasis on like, I'd love to see like a WordPress design kit get worked on, ways to just make it easier to build products and core.
I think that that was launched yesterday, the
Oh,
initiation of that
nice.
on Make Core. Matthias presented the sort of the scope of the new WordPress dashboard.
Fantastic. Well, so that's to me, things like that I want to see supported and given the resources and taken seriously and
Yep.
then adopted. And I think we can do that through the product lens. So I think there's just it's just not much drama to it where it's like we do the work, we put the resources into the project where it needs to be put. There's a close symbiotic relationship, and we just sort of see where it goes from.
I want to add to that since this podcast will go out later than yesterday was Wednesday, July 12th.
Nice.
Uh,
I'll have to check that out. Cool.
I'm also going to date how much time I'm going to need to turn this podcast into a published one, but it's what it is.
See you in 2024.
Yeah, no, it'll be
No, I'm
before that.
kidding.
It'll be before that. But it's I still have quite a bit of a backlog.
Cool.
So I think the only other question I have that sort of is you haven't touched on.
Yeah, please.
You want to get to a place where there's a marketplace,
Yeah.
an app store, or
Yep.
whatever you call it. We have marketplaces, app stores ish inside
Yep.
WordPress ecosystem right now. Theme Forest being the most obvious one. Is there any 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 thoughts on
Yeah,
how that
sure.
integrates or
Um,
doesn't?
at least as I know it. So I haven't looked at Theme Forest and Bado closely in a while. I have a lot of context from the past. But at least as I know it, there was no vision for a ubiquitous play, nor intention, nor strategy in that direction. So like I think it's valuable work. I think it's probably worth discussing if we're successful. What are the long term ramifications to the ecosystem? Because there's always
Yep.
benefits and trade offs, right? But at least the way that I look at it, Envato, to my understanding, and others like them who've done different marketplace plays, I haven't seen anyone who set out with that particular vision focused on ubiquity. It's been more about carving out, whether conscious or not, like certain slices and markets, and then been happy to do that.
Yep.
And also to me, it's really important that whatever, like, I want to see whoever works on this app store problem, I think you have to do so with a holistic view of both the needs of the project, needs of the host, the needs of the products.
Yep.
You can't build a marketplace, in my view, and also get into hosting because you've inherently misaligned interests with the
Yeah.
host that you could work with. So
Yeah. I agree.
um, that could all change. I spent a lot of time like looking for others working on this type of stuff because it wasn't my, oh, I want to go do this big thing, right? And ultimately settled onto it, like, well, at least to what I've seen so far, no one else has like combined that set of vision and interests and desire to
No, I
align
don't think there is.
incentives. So so I'd love to see more cooperation, collaboration, and Vado's done a bunch of great stuff. So there's an openness on my part. I'm not gonna, but in the meantime, just keep going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. From my perspective, Envato specifically, I think they're dropping the ball in terms of vision and innovation. Um, there's so many opportunities they've had. This is a good example of something they could have led the way. And in no way, shape, or form have they been in the vicinity of something like this. Not even. So that's why I was kind of curious if there was any, there had been any discussions, talks, or curiosities from their end towards your Guildenberg project.
Not that I'm aware of. I've had a few conversations with great folks in Envato over the years. I've been writing publicly about this for years, so
Yeah,
no one's asked me. And at least as I think about it now, at least what I can tell of their public focus, it's too different to warrant like me saying, "Hey, do you guys want to change your strategy entirely,
yeah.
get out of hosting to do this?" So
I, I see that as well. Yeah. Wow. Um, so for I generally don't comment too much on someone's project as such, but I am genuinely excited for this one
thank you.
because it solves a problem I think a lot of I'm just going to sound really old now, but a lot of us veterans, a lot of us that are in the WordPress ecosystem for over, I think, let me put it this way: before WordPress truly started to become a much more commercially friendly
Yeah,
solution, which in my mind is 2008.
yeah, that sounds right.
Um, this is that started with Brian Gardner's Revolution theme.
Yep. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then for me, one of the first next ones that was really made an impact is Gravity Forms, which I think
Yep.
is 2009. But
That was
before
the
that,
best
we had
lifetime value I've ever gotten out of a product I purchased early on.
same, same, still use it, still
Yep,
love it.
yep,
Um, so, but um, for those of us who've seen the rise of commercial interest in WordPress, it's started to solve some of the problems, but there's a lot of problems that came with the solutions that
yeah,
were being implemented. Um, we talked a little bit about hosts, how they have an influence, which is possibly not something we want, because you know, if one host purchases a plugin, does the other host still want that plugin to be promoted?
yeah.
It becomes very quickly murky water. Um, And that's a tough thing to solve. But if you solve it from the different perspective, like you're suggesting what you're doing, it starts to become sensible.
It
It's okay. I'm me as a hosting company. I don't necessarily benefit from this directly, but the ecosystem benefits from it, and thus I benefit from it. So it's an indirect movement that I find
yeah.
very interesting to see how this plays out. Um, And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a positive way. I know this is going to play out, and I'm kind of curious how fast it will go into the direction that we'll all be excited.
It's interesting. One of the other this is to me somewhat controversial, but I think things are worth scrutinizing, and I don't mind changing my mind about this in the future. When I look at what Awesome Motive is doing, as an example in
Mhm.
the space, I there's a lot that I can appreciate about how they're going about it and
Yeah,
just the size of the network and sort of what they're doing. But when I look at the data and I look at the behavior, I'm like, so my inclination is based on what I see today, Awesome Motives practices wouldn't be welcomed within the what my vision for like how the guild, if you will, would run. So
I
like
agree.
it's a
I agree.
free space. They can do what they want to do. I want to create incentives. Like to me, in our ideal space here, we create standards and ways of doing things and best practices that are user friendly, user centric, that align with our values for the project, and would
FTC friendly as well. Shout out to
yes,
Carl Hancock.
and would ultimately create like in my ideal, like there's just put it this way, I don't think we should be relying on Awesome Motives like altruism to make better choices.
No.
Whereas if there are clear incentives to make better choices where it's like, "Hey, you don't get distribution if you don't follow these practices." So they're a good example to me because they would for years probably just not care because they have their own distribution, right?
Yeah.
But there is a future state where that might not be the case. And what I would like founders to see is that Awesome Motive is not the only game in town. There
Yeah.
there are other options if you want to sell your product and if you care about the long term. And my hope would be that someone like Awesome Motive says, "You know what? Incentives has changed a bit. We will play ball. We'll also get involved in these things. We'll do this because we see that it's in our best interest to do so, and then we can be happy about it and just let the past be the past." But I think that's an important example to me where it's like Awesome Motive today in the way that they do things, I don't feel like is as friendly to the end users as it could be. It doesn't do the best it could for the project, especially given the leadership position they're in. I'd want to see that improve. I don't expect them to do it from a place of altruism, and I don't have much to offer them today. But in the future, when we have distribution, someone like Awesome Motive might come around and say, "Hey, you know what? We want access to that too." I'm like, awesome. Here's what y'all got to do.
Yeah.
You need to follow these practices
Yeah.
and do things these ways.
I like that example. I enjoy knowing quite a few people working at Awesome Motive,
Yeah, some great people.
Syed included. I have wonderful conversations with them. But yeah, they go about how they market themselves because I think it's mostly the marketing side of things
Yeah,
in a way that doesn't align with my values. That's not passing judgments per se, but it's more, says
it's
more about
also not.
how I see it, as I
It's
see
not the
things.
WordPress values too. Like if you dig into like what we
Yeah,
like, one of them, for instance, is giving credit where credit is due. Like
yeah,
you it's
yeah,
we can copy each other's stuff, right? That's all fair game. It's open source. But part of what we do is if I take something that you built, I'm going to give credit to Remkus. Like, hey, thanks to Remkus who like did the original here. Here's my version of it.
yeah,
That's an example of something that we value. That's part of the lifeblood of this open source ecosystem. You don't have to do it,
yeah.
but
Be
if you
smarter.
don't
Don't
do
copy from me though. But yeah,
it, sure. But anyway, it's an example. And the good news is it's learned behavior. And what I'm on about ultimately is let's create the incentives for people who may not know to practice some of these behaviors that we value. And one of them is like giving credit where credit is due.
yeah. You know, it's a good example of you like the people, you may like the products, and there's a part of how they sell the products is doesn't align.
Yeah.
Um, that's not to say anything bad about the people or the products, but it's more of a yeah, like you said, it's less aligning with the open source idea behind um, WordPress as a project.
Yeah.
That's probably it's hard to explain without turning this into an entirely separate podcast on that
Another
topic.
time.
Matt Medeiros and I talked about this topic as well in the third episode of Within WordPress,
Nice.
and it's it's there's also the scale, the size of the content that they put out, which becomes a difficult thing to find a way around
Yeah.
because they are ubiquitous in presence,
Yep.
um, more than you realize. Let me put it this way. No, but all in all, that is a super interesting project that I genuinely hope to see get way more traction than it currently has because we need a solution that is also not just solving the stuff that you're mentioning. Because one of the things I don't hear you mentioning directly, but I'm pretty sure it's part of your um, how you do things is it elevates WordPress on a professional level. There's a market that we're slowly but surely entering. One of the reasons I asked, what is your definition of enterprise?
Yep.
I've worked at an enterprise company. I've been part of the team that evaluated software where licenses of one license just cost 1 million
Yep.
just to start with.
Yeah.
And then it had to be implemented for probably 4 or 5 times that cost.
Yep.
Uh,
Later.
E-
Yeah.
ERP systems like PeopleSoft and Oracle and stuff like that. So I understand how that side of the market works, and that's quite different from what most people in the WordPress ecosphere say or call um, enterprise.
Yeah.
Uh,
Agreed.
But having said that, I think this is a project that has the ability to move things upscale without losing sight of Joe Q Public in terms of I have a just small website and I maybe have some premium functionality, but nothing too fancy. But if you can service both without one or the other feeling like they're in a bad place, that's a perfect position to be in. And
It's
it
not trivial.
sounds, yeah,
It's important work, it's not trivial, and I'm glad you're picking up on the thread. I think for me, the fact that I had, like, the 5 years of full-time enterprise experience, like, I'm not losing that anytime soon, and ultimately, it's yeah, my so right now, it's a bit of a switch to focus on the SMB, the small business needs to, like, solve those
yep,
problems at scale,
yep,
but I feel like the scrutiny, like, the work that you do to think about the enterprise is part of what makes it's part of what gives people confidence that they're gonna be able to go from small to large. So it needs to be there from the onset. So it is part of my thinking and part of why I wanna have at least a couple of enterprise products that we're always working with.
yep.
And yeah, if we get this balance right, they both feed each other in really healthy symbiotic ways.
Yeah, and by the sound of the stuff that you're thinking about and adding to the mix as a whole, it sounds like you are. So it then is just a matter of maturing it as it goes.
Yeah.
And when we do have that app store available, yeah, it makes sense to approach it from that perspective of professionalism, uplift everything, quality goes up, and therefore the perception goes up, which is, I think, something that I think there's still a lot of people not fully understanding what power we have as a community,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's a great point.
um, in not just this particular area, but the whole is so large that it's
On the
quite
web.
easy to
Yeah.
get to lose track of the impact that we have. And yeah, I see what you're doing as a very interesting step in helping the community as a whole, not just the actual thing that you're building.
Well, part of what I've enjoyed the most is like I've got a clear vision. I'm personally loving this work. It's been this joy though of getting to be part of growing a team around it because ultimately, which is right at the heart of this idea of a guild, like work with like the best people that care about this. This means I'm also working with people that I end up disagreeing with on things. Like I
And you
want
should.
that tension. Yeah,
Yeah, you
it's
should.
like representing the different interests. By the time we get to, are you coming out to CloudFest in March next year?
Yes. Um,
I'll have a lot more. I think that they'll be public and sort of worked out by then. So CloudFest to me is an important part of both our strategic relationships and the way we work with hosting. And also, I've been doing a lot of work to kind of line up some timelines around CloudFest. So a lot more we can talk about.
cool. I look forward to it. And for today, I thank you for providing this wonderful insight into what the Guildenberg project does. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Remkus. Appreciate it.